Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia? This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C311.
Good morning. I'm going to call the State Water Control Board for November 18th, 2025 to order. Welcome, everyone. And before we get started today, I'm going to go ahead and read my rules before I forget them. And then we'll have an approval of the minutes. And then Mr. Yob will have a statement that he needs to give this morning. So let me read the rules and we'll do a moment of introduction from everyone, please. Attendees may not erect any signage inside or outside the meeting room or the building. Attendees are not entitled to be disorderly or disrupt the meeting from proceeding in an orderly, efficient, and effective fashion. Disruptive behavior may result in a recess or removal from the meeting. Possession or use of any device that may disrupt the conduct of business is prohibited, including but not limited to voice amplification equipment, bullhorns, blowhorns, sirens, or other noise-producing devices, as well as signs on sticks, poles, or stakes, or helium-filled balloons. All attendees are to be respectful of all speakers. Rules may be enforced fairly and impartially, not only to ensure the efficient or effective conduct of business, but also to ensure no interference with business of the complex, its employees, or its guests. Attendees wishing to record the proceedings are welcome to do so. However, you may not interfere with the business of the meeting, nor impede the view or participation of other meeting attendees and the staff. No smoking is allowed unless in a designated outside space. This includes tobacco and e-cigarettes. No alcohol, firearms, pyrotechnics, weapons, or any substances or items controlled by law are allowed. No firearms are allowed in the state's contracted spaces except for firearms carried by law enforcement officers or authorized security personnel. All violators may be subject to removal from the meeting facility. Anyone removed from the facility may not re-enter. Anyone who fails to comply with removal may be charged with trespass. So this ends the rules. Again, we're going to have them all memorized before long. So moving on, I will ask for introductions, starting down here to my left for introductions of the board members, please.
Tommy Brennan, Henrico County.
Michelle Johnson, Charles City County.
Scott Cameron, Fairfax County.
Jerry Kilgore, Henrico County.
Steve Yob, also Henrico County.
Mike Rolban, Director DEQ.
Emily Little with the Office of the Attorney General.
And I'm Lou Wallace, representing Far Southwest Virginia, so welcome today. Also, I'm going to ask for, you all have on your board book today and your agenda the minutes from the August 20th, 2025 meeting. I need an approval of those minutes, please.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the minutes as submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. I need a second.
Second.
Have a second from Mr. Brennan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Yob.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I have submitted to the DEQ staff a signed transactional disclosure statement pursuant to Virginia State and Local Government Conflicts of Interest Act before participating in or voting on a number of items on today's agenda. I do have a personal interest in these items, in these transactions being considered, given my employment by the County of Henrico as a Deputy County Manager for Community Operations. Henrico County, like other communities in the Commonwealth, is subject to Virginia Water Quality Management and Virginia Water Protection regulations, and it administers the Virginia Water Protection General Permit. I'm therefore able to participate fairly in agenda items tabs B, C, D, E, F, and G fairly objectively and in the public interest. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Robb. So moving forward for final regulations, the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation, non-VAC-25-875, which is a change of the statewide permit fee schedule in accordance with Chapter 2 of the 2024 Special Sections, First Acts of the Assembly by Ms. Jamie Robb.
Non-VAC 25-875. These amendments specifically address the fee schedule set forth in these regulations. Chapter 2 of the 2024 Special Acts of the Assembly, the Budget Bill, directs the board to amend the existing permit fee schedule such that the fees of the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits for discharges of stormwater from construction activities and municipal separate storm sewer systems are set at an amount representing no less than 60%, but not to exceed 62% of the direct costs for the administration, compliance, and enforcement of such permits. You may recall that the proposed amendments were presented to the board in March 2025, and the board authorized the department to move forward with public participation. Today, I'm presenting to you the final amendments. Excuse me. This slide may look familiar to you. It was included in the presentation back in March and included today as a refresher. The Erosion and Stormwater Management Program is funded through the fees established pursuant to the regulations. To determine the needed fee adjustments, the department started by using the fiscal year 2024 data and that you see on the screen today. In 2024, the fees collected for permit actions and annual maintenance fees covered less than 40% of the overall cost for the department to implement the programs. As previously mentioned, the budget bill directs the board to amend the existing fee schedule such that the fees are set at an amount representing 60 to 62% of the department's implementation cost. This analysis demonstrates that the increase in existing fees of approximately 56 to 61% is needed to fund the stormwater program. The amendments to the permit fee schedule were published in the Virginia Register on August 11th, 2025. That initiated a 60-day public comment period, which ended on October 10th. On September 23rd, the department held a public hearing on the final amendments. During that public comment period, 9 total comments were received. The comments focused on 5 primary areas. Regarding the fee adjustment schedule, commenters expressed concerns with adjusting the fees annually because of the timing with local planning and budgeting. Suggestions were received to adjust fees at an interval of every 5 years. Regarding the use of the Consumer Price Index to annually adjust fees, commenters raised concerns that the Regulatory Advisory Panel had considered this concept but not fully vetted it. Commenters also raised concerns that basing fee increases on the CPI may result in increased fees that outpace actual program needs. Regarding the amount of fee increase, one commenter raised concerns that the increase in fees for construction stormwater permit coverage creates a hardship for the development community that already faces increased costs to meet environmental regulatory mandates. Additionally, a comment was raised concerning the increase in fee for maintenance fees for MS4 permits. Comments were received on the increase in DEQ's share of the construction stormwater permit fee from 28% to 30%, stating that localities serving as a Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Control Authority are the ones implementing plan review, site inspections, and post-construction BMPs. Additionally, comments were received that the lower fees for construction stormwater permits applicable to state agencies, including colleges and universities, should also be applicable to those contractors implementing projects for those state entities. A detailed response to all of these comments are included in the agency background documents included in your board books. The final amendments to the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation fee regulations are to adjust the following: fees for new municipal separate storm sewer system permit coverage, MS4 permit modifications, new coverage for construction stormwater discharges, construction stormwater permit modifications and transfer of ownership, as well as annual maintenance fees for MS4s and construction stormwater permits. It's important to note that the stormwater fees have not changed in more than 15 years. 3 sections of the amendments are related to fees associated with the MS4 permit, which includes new permit issuance fees, major modification of individual permits, and annual permit maintenance fees. And here we have a table demonstrating what the existing fee is in the current regulation, as well as the revised fee that's in the final amendments. And this covers the permit issuance for MS4s, the modifications, as well as the maintenance fees. Final amendments for the construction stormwater permits include adjustments to the individual and general permit coverage fees for initial permit coverage, as well as modifications and transfers of ownership, as well as permit maintenance fees. And again, here we have a table indicating what the existing fee is in the current regulation, as well as what is in the final amendment. And this demonstrates those fees associated with new permit issuance for construction activities. And likewise, these are the fees existing and revised for the modification or transfer of ownership. And here we have the fees associated with annual maintenance fees. So under the stormwater program, any active construction stormwater permit receives an annual maintenance fee as long as that permit is active. In addition to the changes in fee schedules, the final amendments include a provision for fees to be adjusted annually based on the consumer price index. This ensures that fees keep pace with inflation and the department's cost to implement the programs, as required by the budget bill. This is also consistent with the fee adjustments in other department programs. The final amendments contain minimal changes since the proposed stage. This includes changes made to Section 1375 in response to comments received during the 60-day comment period. These include updating the base consumer price index value to the 12-month average value for the period from July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024, comparing the base CPI to the 12-month average for the period ending June 30th of the year in which the adjusted fees are being calculated, adding a requirement for the department to calculate the fee adjustments each year by January 1st, and making the adjusted fees effective on July 1st of each year. And just as an example, because there's a lot of dates going on there, to calculate fees, for example, in 2027, the department will compare the base CPI value to the 12-month average for the period ending on June 30, 2026. And then the department will notify localities in the regulated community of the adjusted fees by January 1, 2027, and then those fees will become effective on July 1, 2027. These changes provide permittees and VESMP authorities notice of fee adjustments, allows localities to estimate fees several months in advance of the effective date to assist with their planning and budget needs, and adjust fees at the pace of inflation, avoiding larger fee increases in the future. Changes were also made to clarify DEQ's role as the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Program Authority for state agencies and federal entities, and those entities with approved approved standards and specifications, and as the Virginia Stormwater Management Program Authority for localities that implement a Virginia Erosion and Sediment Control Program only. This was an omission in existing regulatory language. None of the changes since the proposed stage are substantive. And then lastly, the effective date of the amendments is to be no earlier than July 1, 2026. And welcome to take any questions you may have.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none, you may proceed.
All right, thank you. Staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation, non-VAC 25-875, as final regulations with an effective date of no earlier than July 1, 2026.
We've heard staff recommendation. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the staff recommendation.
I have a motion to approve staff recommendation. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we're moving over to tab C. Mr. Justin Williams will do the presentation here for Water Quality Management Planning Regulation non-VAC 25-720, amendment to add 24 new or revised TMDL waste load allocations in the Potomac, Shenandoah River Basin, James River Basin, and the Tennessee Big Sandy River Basin. Mr. Williams, thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Water Control Board. I'm Justin Williams, and I manage the Watershed Programs Office at DEQ. Today, I'll present waste load allocations for inclusion in the Water Quality Management and Planning Regulations resulting from 4 total maximum daily load studies, and which are necessary pursuant to state and federal mandates. Specifically, I'll cover the applicable river basins for amendment, the laws requiring TMDLs to address water body impairments, a brief overview of the water quality improvement process and TMDL process, including permitting applications, and the specific waste load allocations for the board's consideration. As the board may be aware, there is both state and federal law that requires that there's action taken to address water quality impairments, including development of a TMDL. Specifically, the action for the board to consider today includes 3 new sediment allocations to the Potomac Shenandoah River Basin, 9 new sediment and 4 phosphorus to the James River Basin, and 8 new sediment to the Tennessee Big Sandy River Basin, for a total of 20 sediment and 4 phosphorus across 3 basins resulting from the 4 TMDL studies. This step today is part of the overall water quality improvement process that is undertaken to address water quality improvements identified as a part of the 303D impaired water bodies process. Pursuant to those state and federal mandates, we developed these TMDLs, or as we call them, cleanup studies, to include both waste load allocations, which are presented today, and load allocations, which consider the non-point sources that need to be addressed in order to improve the impairment. Implementation for the waste load allocation, which is considered by the board, is addressed largely through permitting, and the non-point sources in the load allocation are considered in the implementation plan considerations and are available to receive 319 funding. While the TMDL largely drives the actions in permitting to address the impairments, permitting conditions or limitations may occur based upon the actual impairment, including additional stormwater requirements for permits along water bodies with benthic impairments and nutrient credit restrictions for certain impairments. The overall TMDL process includes looking at the existing sources within the water body, both permitted and non-point source, and involving stakeholders using modeling and data to identify causes, sources, loadings, and necessary reductions to remove the impairment. The reductions necessary are identified as the overall TMDL endpoint, which is comprised as the waste load allocation before the board, the load allocation as mentioned for reductions for non-point source, and a margin of safety. The waste load allocation, which addresses permitted sources, can lead to permitting requirements or conditions around reduced pollutant discharges or action plans for permits, general permit conditions, including stormwater pollution prevention requirements, particularly related to inspections and dewatering, and restrict areas available for nutrient credit to purchasing upstream. There's related work that can impact these permitting conditions as well. As the board is aware, there was a Chesapeake Bay TMDL that was developed. So a lot of these additional conditions that may result from an individual TMDL may already be in place, such as inspection requirements or the limitations on nutrient credit purchase. Specifically for the board's consideration in the Potomac-Shenandoah River Basin are the 3 new sediment waste load allocations. This covers approximately 20 miles of water bodies in Shenandoah County and is the result to address an aquatic life impairment driven by too much sediment. While most of the watershed is largely forested, most of the sediment of concern is driven by agricultural sources. In terms of considering permit implications or conditions, there are 3 individual VIPDs permits within the watershed and several general permits, including industrial stormwater and active construction stormwater permits that are considered as a part of the current source analysis in the TMDL process. Indeed, the process involving looking at the potential sources does look over the history of active general permits to ensure appropriate consideration in the equation and loading within the watershed. There are no MS4s in this watershed. And specifically, there are no required reductions for permitted discharges as considered within the waste load allocation and the total TMDL. The TMDL equations do include future growth for new and expanding permits, and because of the underlying requirements related to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL watershed and the impairment, this does not impose additional requirements for general permits. As its sediment, limitations on nutrient credit restrictions also would not apply. Within the James River Basin, there are several sediment waste load allocations for consideration and 3 phosphorus. This covers approximately 35 miles in Henrico, Goochland, and Richmond City. This is driven to address an impairment in aquatic life with too much sediment across the watershed and too much phosphorus in those 3 water bodies. Developed land is driving a large portion of the sources, including impervious area, stream bank erosion, and other permitted activities, except for Dover, which includes more agricultural activities that is driving the impairment. The other consideration for the James River Basin is in the Black Hat Creek area. This is approximately 12 miles in Nelson County. Again, this was an aquatic life impairment driven by too much sediment in both water bodies and too much phosphorus in Black Creek. In this particular watershed, it is largely forested, and among the sources that are considered for the driver in the TMDL, that would be the agricultural activities. The permitting applications within the James River Basin costs 1 individual VIPDs permit that is actually for a sewage treatment plant. While there's no required actions related to the sediment, it does call for a 25.1% reduction in phosphorus for this permitted activity. There are several other general permits and 4 MS4s in the watershed. For the required reduction in phosphorus, the treatment plant was involved and invited to be a part of the stakeholder process, and DEQ has worked out to reach out to them to discuss training and other opportunities for implementation, which would occur in the next permit reissuance. Again, this equation does include future growth for new and expanding permits, and there's no additional general permit requirements that will be imposed related to stormwater because of the underlying impairments in the Chesapeake Bay watershed TMDL requirements. DEQ water planning staff engaged with the nutrient credit staff to ensure and look at the overlay between the TMDL watershed and the impact on the availability of purchasing credits, and there does appear to be sufficient upstream credits for phosphorus if needed within the current nutrient trading scheme. Within the Tennessee Big Sandy River Basin, this is a revision to prior waste load allocations. This modification to the TMDL was undertaken to look at changes and practices installed in the watershed, as well as to address an expansion of a permitted facility. It covers approximately 31 miles in Smith, Washington, and Wythe County, and again is designed to address an aquatic life impairment that is driven by too much sediment from permitted activities and agricultural activities. Within this particular watershed, there's 3 individual sewage treatment plant permits and a DWR permit. There are several general permits, and during the course of the TMDL study, there were 21 industrial stormwater and 18 active construction general permits. And again, the history of general permits in the watershed was evaluated. There are no locality MS4s in the watershed, and there's no required reductions for these permitted activities within this waste load allocation presented to the board. Again, it does include future growth for new or expanding permits, and in this particular instance, because it is a TMDL modification, and there will not be new stormwater inspection or other requirements imposed upon permittees. All of the TMDLs involve a very robust and significant public participation process as we work with stakeholders to identify appropriate scenarios for implementation and identification of the waste load and load allocations in the TMDL process. In this particular instance, for the Crooked Stony Pew Run, there were 2 public meetings and 3 community engagement meetings with 13 to 40 attendees. For the Dover Deep Henrico Tribs area, there were 3 public meetings, 3 community engagement meetings, and 16 to 24 attendees. Black and Hat Creek had 2 public meetings, 6 community engagement meetings with 11 to 32 attending, and Middle Fork had 2 public meetings, 2 technical advisory committees with 7 to 21 attendees. All 4 TMDL reports had no public comments during their final public comment stage. There was a notice for the waste load allocations for the board to adopt from September to October for the waste load allocations presented, and no comments were received during that period either. The action presented for the board today is pursuant to Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act and the exemption for TMDL study, development, and waste load allocations. And with that, I will pause for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Williams from the board? Hearing none, you may proceed.
Thank you. The staff recommendation today is for the board to amend the Water Quality Management Planning Regulation 9 VAC 25720 to include the TMDL waste load allocations as shown in attachment 2 of the board book material, and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any interested person at any time with respect to revision or reconsideration.
You've heard the staff recommendation. What's the pleasure of this board?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation as presented.
A second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the regulations from the staff recommendations. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Thank you. Moving on to tab B, we've got the reissuance of Virginia Water Protection General Permit Regulations presented by Ms. Brenda Wynn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Wynn. I'm the manager of the Office of Wetlands and Stream Protection at DEQ, and I'm here to present the final stage of our amendments to reissue Virginia Water Protection General Permit Regulations 9 VAC 25-660, -670, -680, and -690. Within those regulations, there are 4 general permits that cover a variety of activities, as you see here. They all expire on August 1st of 2026. And this is our 3rd reissuance cycle of the general permit since they were implemented. Just to recap, general permit benefits. They're our most frequently used pathway of permitting projects in the Virginia Water Protection Permit Program. They offer low impact limits for each permit. They have lower application fees because of those lower impact limits. And they are also a faster issuance time, no more than 45 days per the Code of Virginia. The actions we've taken to date include the June State Water Control Board, where we introduced our proposed regulatory amendments, and you approved the staff to go to public comment. Our public comment period was August to October 24th of 2025, with one hearing on October 15th. 2 comments were received during the public comment period. Staff is not making any changes to these regulations since they were presented as proposed at the June board meeting. Reviewing the amendments, we are moving a lot of provisions to Section 27, repealing obsolete Section 25 pertaining to transition of applicants and permittees from the last cycle, moving the existing administrative continuance provision that's in our regulations from Section 35 to 27, and doing an overall reorganization of Section 27 to keep like provisions together. We're also restating the new general permit term, August 2nd, 2026 to August 1st, 2036. We're removing obsolete reference to the Virginia Stormwater Handbook that's in 690, and we're replacing references to the 1992 Virginia Erosion and Sediment Control Handbook with citations to the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation 9 VAC 25-875. We're also making corrections to typos and grammar, updating titles, version dates, and links in the forms and documents incorporated by reference sections of each regulation. The public comments we received were from the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance in support of the current VWP4 permit use limits, which are currently at 2 acres of wetlands or open water impacts and 1,500 linear feet of stream impacts. They also supported a 10-year permit term. Another comment asked questions regarding reasonable assurance for environmental protections, and reasonable assurance is obtained through application reviews, inclusion of permit conditions or coverage conditions, and compensatory mitigation for unavoidable permanent impacts. The detailed response to these comments are in your agency background documents of the board book. No change to the regulations in response to public comments are proposed. And I will take some questions if anyone has them.
Questions from the board?
Madam Chair, I have one question. How will this affect linear projects or projects that can't move? I've had tremendous experience with this, unfortunately, over the years. Transportation, and I see VCTA commented, so if you could address that, please.
The comment they had was mostly for the aggregate industry in WP4, so there's no effect on that, and there's no effect on WP3, which is typically for linear transportation projects. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? You may proceed.
I'll proceed to the staff recommendation. Staff recommends that the State Water Control Board adopt the general permit regulations as final, Chapter 660, 670, 680, and 690, as shown here, and affirm that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration of these regulations as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
I'll entertain a motion from the board on staff recommendations, please.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the staff recommendation.
I have a motion. I need a second.
Second, Madam Chair.
I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen.
Thank you.
At this time, we're moving on to tab H. That's proposed regulation, water quality standards, 9 VAC 25-260-2024 triennial review rulemaking to adopt new, update, or cancel existing water quality standards as required by 62.1-44.15 of the Code of Virginia and the Federal Clean Water Act 33 USC 125 551. Dr. Tish Robertson.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm representing the Water Quality Standards Program, and I'm pleased to be here to present proposed amendments to the Water Quality Standards Regulation made under a process known as triennial review, and I'll be requesting approval to go to public comment and hearing. We conduct triennial review of our water quality standards as mandated under the Federal Clean Water Act and state law. Both require a review of the regulations every 3 years, and inevitably when we do this review, we make updates to incorporate new scientific information, updated policies. The last triennial review was completed in April of 2023. The current triennial review was initiated in April 2025 of this year when we issued a notice of intended regulatory action. And that comes with the 30-day public comment period, which closed May 21st of 2025. After that comment period, we formed a 15-member regulatory advisory panel made up of representatives from environmental organizations, regulated entities, state and federal agencies, including EPA. And so the proposed amendments that I'm going to be presenting today, they reflect input that we received from the regulatory advisory panel, as well as the public comments that we received and staff input. We held 3 meetings with our regulatory advisory panel, July 24th, August 15th, and August 28th of this year. And these are the organizations that were represented on our RAP. So typically when we conduct a triennial review, we're making updates to water quality criteria because EPA is always updating their guidance on water quality criteria. We will also update water body class information and use designations. And then we usually have what we call housekeeping items where we're correcting typos, providing clarifications in the language. Sometimes there are landmarks that need to be updated. And then, as I said earlier, we get feedback from the public as well as agency programs, and so those will be reflected in revisions as well. So I'm going to cover the substantive proposed amendments this morning. I'm going to start with the biggest one, which is the proposed expansion of the deep water use in Virginia's portion of the Chesapeake Bay. So we have the deep water designated use reserved for deeper waters of the bay that undergo persistent stratification during the summer. And so we say that a water body is stratified when you can see discrete layers in the water column. And so for an estuary like the bay, we look for the presence of a pycnocline, which is a layer where you have a rapid change, an increase in water density at depth. And the pycnocline actually acts as a physical barrier to mixing and aeration of the water column. And so usually with a stratified water body, you have low dissolved oxygen in the bottom waters, which is why we have a special designated use for such waters. Currently, only the northern portion of Virginia's Bay mainstem is designated for the deep water use, and I'm going to show a map that shows what this looks like. DEQ staff are recommending the expansion of the deep water boundary to include areas that are currently not included in that designation, but have the physical features of deep water habitat. The map on the left shows the current designated use scheme for Virginia's portion of the Chesapeake Bay. And so all waters of the bay are automatically designated for the open water use. And then a certain subset of those waters are designated for more refined uses like the deep water use or the deep channel use. And so that area in the dark blue is an area that's designated for the open water use, deep water, and deep channel, as shown in the illustration there on the left. So the open water use is restricted to just the surface layer when a pycnocline is present, which usually happens during the summer. And then that area in the medium blue there on the figure on the right, that's where the deep water use is. And then in the very bottom where it's darker blue, that's the deep channel. So we have the deep channel use for very deep waters of the Chesapeake Bay. The reason why these boundaries are important is because they dictate which dissolve criteria apply where. So the numbers there represent kind of the more routinely assessed criteria, and so the open water habitat gets the most stringent DO criterion, and then the deep water gets a lower, less stringent DO criterion, and then the deep channel gets the least stringent because that's where, due to the stratification, you would expect to find very low DO, and the aquatic life are physiologically adapted to such low levels. The area in the medium blue color there on the map on the left is only designated for the open water and deep water uses. So if you look at the figure on the right there, that's what it looks like as a cross-section during the summer, where the open water use is restricted to the surface, and then below the top of the picnic line, it is the deep water use. And the deep water applies throughout the entirety of that picnic line all the way down to the sediment. And
Dr. Robertson, didn't I see 1 milligram per liter on the bottom on a different slide, or I just saw it somewhere?
yes, on this slide, this is where we have the deep channel designated use. So the deep channel would get 1 milligram per liter as the criterion. Where we just have the deep water use without the deep channel, it's 3 milligrams per liter from the start of the picnic line down to the sediment. And so the area on below the median blue area on the map on the right, on the left, is only designated for the open water use. So we apply 5 milligrams per liter from surface to bottom in those waters. So the issue is that when EPA laid down these boundaries in 2004, there was an assumption that the Atlantic Ocean is, due to our proximity to the Atlantic, constantly recharging the bottom waters. And so that would obviate the need for a special designated use because the DO was assumed to be high enough to support the open water use. What DEQ staff are finding is that assumption is not actually matching up with our monitoring data. There is some recharge and replenishment, but not enough to actually alleviate the low DO that's being caused by the stratification. And so I'm going to just show what the stratification looks like because it's important for the board to see that there was a lot of monitoring data to support this proposal. So this station that we're looking at and the red star on that map is a deep water station. It's within the current boundary of the deep water use. And so the profile that we're looking at is of water density, and it's basically taking all of the density measurements that DEQ has been measuring going back to the 80s. So it represents 40 years of monitoring data. If this was a well-mixed water column, you would expect that black curve to be a straight line up and down. But the fact that you have a bin there indicates that it's a stratified water column during the summer. And that dashed line there is representing the average depth of the picnic line. And so that's characteristic of a deep water water body. If we go to a station that's right outside of that deep water boundary, we see a very similar picture where we have a pronounced picnic line on average. Even further away from the boundary, we see even more pronounced, and this is because this station is actually a very deep station. It's 22 meters deep on average, whereas the station shown on the left, there's only 10 meters. So we have very deep water in that area of the bay that's not actually designated for the deep water use. Even going almost to the mouth, we see the stratification there. Now, stratification is an important feature of deep water habitat, but it's not sufficient to get the designation. You also have to show that there's low dissolved oxygen linked to the occurrence of the pycnocline, and that's what these figures are showing. So I know it's a lot to look at, but each figure there is representing a different monitoring station. And in the upper left there's the deep water station that we were looking at earlier as our reference. And so you see that the pycnocline shown by the little blue dots at the top of the figure, that's giving you the frequency of pycnoclines over all of our monitoring events going back to 1985. So 98% of the time, a pycnocline is present there, and the red lines indicate those monitoring events where we observe low dissolved oxygen levels below the pycnocline. Low DO would be less than 5 milligrams per liter. So pretty much every time we go to that station, we're going to find low DO in the bottom waters. And the little red circles or stars there indicating where very low DO was observed. And so you can see that in those stations to the right of that figure, all of them, we have low DO present below the pycnocline, and we also have a high frequency of stratification. The heights of those bars are indicating how much of the water column is taken up by low DO. So the figure here in the middle, that's CB 7.2, the 2 got dropped off, but that station is the very deep station that we were looking at the previous slide. On average, we're looking at like 10, 11 meters worth of low DO. That's a lot of the volume taken up by low DO, and that is likely why we're not attaining the open water criterion in that area. And so the scheme on the left is what we've been looking at. That's the current scheme for the designated uses in Virginia's Chesapeake Bay. What's being proposed is the image on the right, where all of the segment CB6PH is being proposed for the deep water use, and most of the segment CB7PH is being proposed. The area at the mouth is being excluded because DEQ staff cannot find any evidence of low DO in that area. And then also there's a channel that cuts through Maujack Bay that's also being included in the proposal. Now that proposed modification would be to Section 10 of the Water Quality Standards Regulation. This is where we describe designated uses. Currently, there's a reference to an EPA document that lays out the spatial extents of all of the designated uses in the bay. What is being proposed is an additional reference to a DEQ staff-authored technical support document that lays out the justification for expanding the deep water use in the Chesapeake Bay. Another substantive proposed amendment is the incorporation of EPA's aquatic life criteria for PFOA and PFOS. These are two chemicals in the class of chemicals known as PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as forever chemicals. And because of their persistence in the environment, we find PFAS in just about every environmental medium: water, air, fish, soil, human, animal, blood. And studies have shown that exposure to some PFAS in the environment may be linked to harmful health effects in humans and animals. In 2024, EPA finalized nationally recommended criteria for two PFAS substances, perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS. These criteria are designed to protect freshwater organisms, and they're expressed as water column and invertebrate fish tissue concentrations. So this table is showing what the nationally recommended criteria look like. The far left, we have the criteria components. So all aquatic life criteria have three components: magnitude, which is the maximum allowable concentration. So the first two columns there are acute and chronic water column concentrations, and then we have invertebrate whole body and fish whole body, fish muscle concentrations. The duration is the period of time over which the magnitude is expressed or represented. So it is standard for acute water column criteria to be a 1 hour average. It's also standard for them to, for chronic criteria to be a 4-day average. And then the animal tissue concentrations are instantaneous. That means that there is no temporal averaging for those values. And then the frequency is the interval of time over which an exceedance of the magnitude is allowed on average. And so it is standard for the water column concentrations to be given a 1 exceedance in 3 years frequency, and then the animal tissue concentrations are never to be exceeded. Now, the board may be familiar with the parts per trillion expression of PFAS, so I have changed the criteria into parts per trillion so that you can compare their magnitudes to the EPA maximum contaminant levels shown there at the top and the VDH fish tissue advisory levels. So the aquatic life criteria are considerably greater in magnitude than the human health criteria. Now, this item was the only item that the regulatory advisory panel did not have a full consensus on. We did have one RAP member who had concerns about adopting the criteria without EPA implementation guidance. And so DEQ staff feel that the criteria are relatively straightforward, and we do not anticipate that there would be any issues implementing these criteria. So then the next substantive proposed amendment is amendments to the copper biotic ligand model language. The board adopted the copper biotic ligand model in 2016 to provide an alternative to hardness-based freshwater copper endpoints. We're modifying the language to include a statement that agency-approved procedures are to be used for conducting a BLM study and deriving freshwater copper criteria for permitting evaluations. So a study is required because there are 10 input parameters for the BLM, and many of them are geochemical ions. So there has to be a pretty substantial data set to actually implement these criteria. And we are currently working on an implementation guidance for conducting the BLM study as well as deriving the freshwater copper criteria. The recommended changes also make it clear that the BLM-based criteria supersede hardness-based criteria. And then in section 185, this is where we have our Chesapeake Bay aquatic life criteria. We have a list of dissolved oxygen criteria, and 11 of the criteria magnitudes are presented in this section. 6 of them are currently expressed as a whole number, while the remaining 5 have 2 significant digits. So there's a number in the ones place, and then there's a tenths place. So there are 2 significant digits for some of the criteria, but only 1 digit for the others. If you look elsewhere in the regulation where we have DO criteria applicable to inland waters, you see 2 significant digits in those criteria. So DEQ staff are recommending to bring greater consistency to DO criteria in the regulation, that those 5 of those criteria in the section 185 have a tenths placeholder added to them. So we have the table here showing the dissolved oxygen criteria in section 185. The numbers in the red boxes are the ones being proposed for the tenths placeholder. This would ensure that implementation programs know that measurements need to be rounded to the tenths place, and just alleviate confusion there. And another modification to section 185 is to the implementation language that's in the section pertaining to Bay DO criteria. Current language restricts the assessment of these criteria to the cumulative frequency distribution method. This method has not allowed for the assessment of all Bay DO criteria using all existing data sets. And so the change would allow for the use of DEQ approved methods, including the cumulative frequency distribution. And then we have proposed amendment in section 310 to incorporate site-specific DO criterion for the tidal Chickahominy River. So this is a water of the bay, and DEQ staff have been applying default DO criteria to this segment of the bay, but DEQ staff have recently determined that the water quality in the tidal Chickahominy is significantly influenced by surrounding wetlands. And so we know that wetlands have a depressing effect on DO, and we are seeing low DO in this system. EPA has developed a special DO criterion for situations like this, and so staff are recommending that this special DO criterion be applied to the tidal Chickahominy. We have a similar situation on the eastern shore with the tidal Pocomoke River, which is shared between Maryland and Virginia, as you can see in the map on the right. It sits right on the state boundary, and Maryland has adopted that special DO criterion that I was talking about that EPA developed for wetland-influenced water bodies, whereas Virginia has been using the default DO criterion of 5 milligrams per liter. And so DEQ staff are recommending that the special DO criterion be applied to Virginia's portion of the Pocomoke River so that there is greater consistency there. So those are the substantive proposed amendments. A number of issues came up during the public comment period, and that's shown here. These were presented and deliberated in front of the regulatory advisory panel. The summary of these issues and our responses are provided in the board materials. And I will pause here for questions. Okay. Staff recommendation, authorize staff to proceed to public comment and hearing with the proposed amendments to include the changes to the water quality standards 9 VAC 25-260 for triennial review as presented today, and authorize staff to serve as the hearing officer for public hearings on this amendment.
Thank you. What is the board's pleasure on the staff recommendation?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we approve staff's recommendations.
I have a motion. I need a second.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from this board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Robertson. At this time, we're moving on to the agenda, other business, fiscal year 2026, Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, final authorizations. Ms. Megan Mayfield, please.
Good morning, Chairwoman Wallace and members of the Virginia State Water Control Board. My name is Megan Mayfield. I'm the Director of the Office of Clean Water Finance and Assistance, as well as the Office of Training Services with DEQ. I'm here today to present the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, which I'll refer to as Revolving Loan Fund so that we don't have a mouthful during the presentation, the fiscal year 26 project priority list. So just a background, the revolving loan fund for DEQ received 27 applications totaling almost $475.5 million for this fiscal year. Between DEQ and Virginia Resources Authority, we completed a capacity analysis, which will allow us for approximately $250 million in funding for this fiscal year. Upcoming fiscal year. We did remove 5 projects based on project eligibility. Compliance with Virginia Code and bypass procedures, which we will discuss on the next slide further. The Director of DEQ gave a tentative approval of the project priority list on September 30th of 2025, and that same day we put it out to public comment. That public comment period ended on October 31st, and we received no comments regarding the project priority list. Today, we are seeking board approval of the final fiscal year project priority list and interest rates for those 22 projects, totaling $255,742,977, which we will outline in subsequent slides. With regards to the revolving loan fund fiscal year 26 application reviews, 2 loan requests were reduced based on DEQ's design manual criteria number 3, which is ability to secure funding from other sources. We did reduce Hampton Road Sanitation District requests from $150 million to $60 million because in the past 4 years we have we have given authorization to $300 million to HRSD and revolving loan. And then Prince William County H.R. Mooney facility, we reduced the request from $36 million to $10 million, as in the past 3 years, we have authorized $120 million to that facility. 1 loan request was reduced under the Clean Water Act Section 603C1, which is eligibility. Upper Occoquan Service Authority, we did reduce their request from $6.6 million to $1.3 million. This was based on a determination of maintenance versus improvement. They did include $5.3 million in their request to replace carbon filters, which have a life cycle, and those need to be replaced frequently. And as such, we could not include that in this programmatic request. We did decline 1 loan request for land conservation. We bypassed that based on State Code 62.1 to 29.3, which is the code that requires that we satisfy all wastewater eligible projects before approving land conservation. And as we weren't able to satisfy those, we did have to bypass that. Additionally, 4 loan requests were bypassed based on DEQ's design manual criteria number 5, readiness to proceed. As you can see, Craig Newcastle, Carroll County, Morey Service Authority, and the town of Abingdon were all bypassed as they did not meet the requirements for our design, as well as EP expectations for construction start dates, and were outside of project pace. Here you can see the proposed project list. These are all 22 projects on the top that are white, as well as you can see the ones grayed out on the bottom were the ones that were bypassed. You can see the requested amounts there in that 3rd column over, as well as the approved amounts, and those only changes are as we described in the earlier slide. So again, 22 projects for almost $256 million. Here are the fiscal year 26 interest rates. There were some hardship rates that we were able to award this year for those localities that met that project criteria. The other projects are going to be at the program rate, which is a minimum of 1%, but the rate will be determined at the time of close. Any questions regarding the project priority list or decisions that were made?
Any questions from the board? You may proceed.
Thank you very much. So the staff recommendation is that the board authorize the execution of loan agreements for the fiscal year 26 project priority list, loan amounts, interest rates, and terms listed in the table titled Fiscal Year 2026 Proposed Interest Rates and Loan Term Authorizations, and that the 20-year program turn rates are set at least 1.5%, which is 150 basis points below market. 25-year term program rates are 1.25%, 125 basis points below market, and 30-year term program rates are 1%, 100 basis points below market. Based on Virginia Resource Authority's evaluation of the market conditions that exist about a month prior to each closing. The hardship interest rate will be 0.5%, and the minimum interest rate will be 1% for all other loans. Loan closings will be subject to a receipt of favorable financial capability analysis report and supporting documentation from Virginia Resources Authority for each loan recipient.
Thank you. Board, you've heard staff recommendation. What's your pleasure?
Madam Chair, I move we adopt the staff recommendation.
We have a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have buried my agenda. Hang on.
We are up to.
We're at, yes, controversial permits. Oh, they're already there. Thank you. I apologize.
That's great. Hey, good morning, Chair, members of the board.
Thank you.
My name is Bryant Thomas. I'm our Director of the Water Resources Division. This morning, I'm going to be presenting the controversial permit report along with my colleague, Melanie Davenport, who's behind me here. So I'm going to be covering the first series of permits, the first 5, and then Melanie will pick up on talking about activities associated with gas pipelines. So this report, this briefing satisfies the state code that provides that at each regular meeting of the board, that the department provide an overview and update regarding any controversial permit pending before the department. And a controversial permit is simply basically a permit, in this case, water permitting action, for which a public hearing has been granted. You may recognize several permits that we're going to talk about this morning. This first one is a Synagro Central LLC, Essex County permit. This is a Virginia Pollution Abatement Permit, permit number VPA 00831. This is specifically a permit modification request. Synagro holds contracts with multiple wastewater plants to land apply biosolids. So those are the treated sewage sludge. The regulations require a separate permit for each county in which biosolids are land applied, and each permit authorizes multiple land application sites within that county and for each land applier. The VPA permit term is 10 years, and so adding additional land application sites can be done during that permit term through a modification such as this, or it can be done at a reissuance process, which we'll be talking about in our next permit. This is just a little bit of an overview and a summary of the history of this permit, first issued by DEQ in 2016, a modification in 2019 that added additional acreage, and then we received a modification request in July of 2024. That request is for an additional 6,337.1 acres. I'm just going to hit a couple highlights on this slide. We've talked about a number of these, but in particular, I would note that in May of this year, we held a public hearing on the draft permit. The public hearing comment period associated with that was April 16th through June 4th. And on August 18 of this year, we held a public hearing on the summary of public comments. And the permitting action, or the permit action on this particular permit, is paused at the moment at the request of the applicant. The next permit we'll look at is also a VPA permit, a Virginia Pollution Abatement Permit, VPA permit number 000075. This is for Synagro Central LLC in Orange County, and this is the reissuance of that permit. Again, the permit term is 10 years. This is the reissuance. And at reissuance, as I mentioned earlier, additional land application sites may be requested for addition. These maps show first the location of the county in the Commonwealth on the top right, and then within the county, the areas where land application is either currently authorized in green or would be added in the burgundy color. You would note on the slide here that currently the permit authorizes 3,542.3 acres for land application. With the reissuance, it's proposed to add an additional 200.7 acres, but also removing almost 1,200 acres from that authorization. So the total acreage with the reissuance would be 2,564.9 total acres. Looking at the history of this permit and permit status, this permit was first issued by DEQ in 2015. There were 2 modifications to add acreage, both in 2016 and 2019. And then, as I noted earlier, the reissuance requests an additional 200.7 acres and removal of 1,178.1 acres. And then as far as the permit timeline and some of the major items on here, I would note that the public comment period on the draft permit was extended from July 3 through August 4 of this year. DEQ granted the hearing request at the end of August. The public hearing was held on October 23rd of this year, with the comment period associated with the public hearing extending from September 18th through November 7th. Looking ahead, and we are expecting that we will hold the summary of public comments hearing. It's going to be in December, January. We'll be working around the holiday schedule to work through that when we will be holding that next hearing. I'm going to move to our next controversial permit. This one is one that has been on the docket here for each of your meetings for the last year or so. This is the Caroline County Virginia Water Protection Permit, VWP, permit number 20-0514 for the Rappahannock River water supply. This is a new VWP permit issuance, and it pertains to a surface water withdrawal from the Rappahannock River for public water supply purposes. I would note, as we talk about this, the VWP permit, the VPA permits, the last 2 we looked at were 10-year permit terms. This is a 15-year permit term. And an overview, these are some key dates. I'm going to kind of pick it up at the very bottom. The public hearing held in September of 2024. And then additional information, additional analysis, working with the permittee after that first public hearing. We then went for a second public hearing and associated comment period on an updated or revised permit. The comment period on that updated draft permit extended from August 10th through September 25th of this year. The hearing was on September 10th, and then on November 6th, we held the second hearing, which is the summary of public comments hearing. Looking ahead, we are expecting a final permit action on this later this month. Okay, I'm going to change from the VWP permit. We're going to talk about a couple, the next 2 will be Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, or VPDES permits. The first one is for the Loudoun County Sanitation Authority, and it's specifically the Waterford Sewage Treatment Plant. This pertains to discharge of treated wastewater to South Fork, Catoctin Creek in the Potomac River watershed. The permit history, if you will, and permit status, we received the application in July of 2024 for this reissuance. The draft permit was issued to the applicant in June of this year, and the public comment period associated with that draft permit was held between July 12th and August 11th of this year, and the request for a hearing was approved in September 3rd. The public hearing was held on October 22nd, and the public hearing period, the comment period associated with the hearing extended from September 19th through November 6th. We're looking ahead, we're expecting the summary of public comments hearing, so that second hearing in December, and a final permit action in December, but again, we're going to be working around the holidays, so that's what we're looking at is in the December time period. And then the last controversial permit that I will be presenting is for the Arlington County Water Pollution Control Plant. This is VPDS permit number VA 0025143. Again, this is a reissuance of that permit. The VPDS permits have 5-year permit terms, and this again pertains to the discharge of treated wastewater to 4 Mile Run in the Potomac watershed. Looking at the history of the permitting action and the permit status, we received the application in June of 2024. The public comment period on the draft permit extended from September 2023 through October 2023 of this year. Earlier this month, on November 5th, we granted the request for a public hearing. Looking ahead, the public hearing comment period will likely run in December and January. That's going to be a 45-day comment period. We would likely be looking at seeing the hearing in January of next year, and the second hearing, the summary of public comments hearing, in February of next year, with final permit action likely in March of next year. So that completes my portion of the presentation. I will pass it off to Melanie, but I will also entertain any questions if anybody has any of those.
Madam Chair, I have two, may I?
Yes.
The Synagro being put on hold, what is the reason for that they're putting it on hold?
I presented that there's two permits from Synagro, one in Essex County.
I'm referring to the Essex.
One in Orange County. It's my understanding that they want to have the Orange County permit proceed and see how that proceeds. The comments we're receiving on the permits, particularly on biosolids, pertain specifically to PFAS. That's the primary issue of concern, and I think Synagro is just looking to bring both of these permit actions on a similar track and see how they proceed and what type of comments and what may happen over the course of the next couple of months.
And then my second was, why a reduction in orange? You would assume that they would be increasing, not reducing. So is there a reason for reduction?
I'm not familiar with the reason for reduction specifically, but it's not uncommon to be changing their game plan, if you will. They are adding some acreage and adding some fields, but I'm not aware of the specifics on why that significant reduction in orange with this reissuance.
Okay.
But we can follow up and find out and be glad to share that information with you.
Well, you answered the Essex. The orange, it's just curious.
Okay.
Okay. Madam Chair, I have nothing else.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, I am going to continue to talk about 3 additional controversial permits that DEQ is currently considering. And this is the first time that you will hear about all of these permits. And in fact, there are 3 permits related to 2 projects. The first project is the Transcontinental Gas Pipeline Company, or Transco, their Southeast Supply Enhancement Project. This project goes by lots of names. Eden Loop is how they also describe it, and it's construction of a 42-inch diameter natural gas pipeline, almost 27 miles long, from Transco Village, which is in Pittsylvania County, to the Virginia-North Carolina state line. It includes the addition of 2 electric motor-driven compressor units at existing compressor station, and the purpose of this project is to provide an upgrade of existing facilities between Virginia and North Carolina. The project corridor is almost exclusively contained within an existing 100-foot wide construction right-of-way that will include a 50-foot permanent right-of-way once construction is complete. For this project, DEQ is considering 2 required permits. The first is the Virginia Water Protection Permit, and that's number 25-1277. The second is an Upland 401 Water Quality Certification, which is certification number 25-001. As you might recall, when this board considered permitting for the Mountain Valley Pipeline mainline, you issued an Upland 401 Water Quality Certification. That concept was actually codified by a subsequent General Assembly action. So this is the first time that we are seeing a project that exceeds the 36-inch pipeline diameter that requires both the VWP permit and the Upland 401 Water Quality Certification. We are processing these permits separately to the extent that each one will have a separate record and record of decision, but they are on the same schedule, which is outlined here. For this project, we received the application for both the Upland 401 and the VWP in June of this year. We issued a draft permit and the tentative certification decision to the applicant on September 16th. We actually public noticed both the draft permit and the notice of a hearing at the same time on the assumption that there would be requests for a public hearing because it will probably be considered a controversial permit. Those public notices were published on September 20th. We held the public hearing for each of those actions on 2 subsequent days down in Danville, October 22nd and October 23rd of this year. We anticipate the summary of public comment hearing will happen in December for each of those permit actions, and we are anticipating final permit action and final water quality certification decision sometime in December of 2025. The second pipeline project is the Mountain Valley Pipeline Southgate project. This is construction of a 30-inch diameter natural gas pipeline, approximately 27 miles long, which will go from the proposed Lambert interconnect in Pennsylvania to the Virginia-North Carolina state line. The purpose of this project is to transport gas from that connection point with Mountain Valley Pipeline mainline to an interconnection point in East Tennessee natural gas system, which is in North Carolina, and then on to 2 delivery points in Rockingham County. What's interesting to note is that the right-of-way for this project actually is pretty much the same as the one I just spoke to about Transco, in that most of this construction is proposed within an existing project corridor. Similarly to what we did with Transco, we did receive the application in April, determined to complete in September, issued a draft permit, and again, public noticed both the availability of the draft VWP permit and the public hearing at the same time. Because this project is only a proposed 30-inch pipeline, it does not trigger the requirement for the Upland 401 certification. The public comment period for this VWP permit extends through December 5th, and the public hearing is scheduled for Thursday evening in Chatham. We anticipate the summary of public comment hearing to happen in January, with final permit action also in January. Are there any questions? Any questions from Ms. Davenport? Looks like not. Thank you very much, then. While you're up there, you want to just go ahead and do Mountain Valley, and then I'll skip around. Sorry. Somebody's going to have to pull it up for me, please. Thank you. So the update on Mountain Valley Pipeline today is that we are actually getting very close to permanent stabilization. So this project will need to have permanent stabilization, which means we have to see successful stabilization growth through 2 growing cycles. Because of the scope of this pipeline in terms of it's over 100 miles, it's not like a traditional 300-acre site where you can look around and say, okay, everything is stabilized, we know when it was planted, and we know when we've been through 2 planting cycles, 2 growing cycles. So that's why it's kind of hard. I feel like for the last year I've come and spoken about, well, they're getting to post-restoration, they're getting to final stabilization, but in fact, it's because there are parts and pieces of the project where we haven't had the 2 growing cycles because of the time it's taken them to either remove an access road or remove erosion control devices. So there continues to be bits of disturbance So we are not at the point of saying we have had 2 growing cycles for the entirety of the project, but we are getting close. In speaking to the project developers, they expect to be able to really reduce their manpower come December, because so much of the project really is getting into post-restoration with permanent stabilization. And these are just some pictures. Again, if you've been following this all along, it's really quite amazing in terms of how much we do see we are in permanent stabilization. They are continuing to install their permanent access roads. So again, that construction has to finish before they start their trigger of their 2 growing cycles. We continue to inspect the maintenance of those erosion and sediment controls that are still in place. They have removed a significant number of the control devices throughout the corridor. As you can see with those numbers on spread G, they've removed about 72%, almost 60% on spread H, and 82% on spread I. And that totals almost 78 miles where those erosion control devices have been removed. And those are bags. I don't know whether those are bags of silt fence or filter sock. We have only had to conduct 2 complaint investigations from the period of June 11th through September 10th. We have a number of compliance inspections. We've only noted 2 issues of noncompliance, and we did just assess a demand for stipulated penalties from the period of June 11th through September 10th. And I believe there's a typo on that slide. I think we should be showing those compliance activities were from September. No, that's probably right, because we are only in the middle of November. So things are really finishing up on that project just as we begin the other 2 projects. Any questions?
Any questions?
Such a cool picture.
This is a cool picture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ms. Campbell. Report on groundwater supply in the Commonwealth east of Interstate 95. Or Mr. Campbell.
Good morning, Madam Chairman.
I apologize.
Let's see, do we have a...
I've successfully messed the system up, and I apologize to everyone.
I'll wait a moment to catch up. All right, thank you. My name is Brian Campbell. I manage DEQ's groundwater characterization and monitoring program. As you may know, Senate Joint Resolution number 25 in the 2024 session directed DEQ to complete a study of groundwater supply in the Commonwealth east of I-95. And this presentation will preview the contents of DEQ's draft report, which will be delivered to the General Assembly for publication on the first day of the upcoming session. So I will provide a brief overview of groundwater supply east of I-95, as well as the technical findings of DEQ's study and an assessment of the Groundwater Management Act of 1992. This is a look at the Virginia Coastal Plain Aquifer System. So the area east of I-95 generally encompasses the Virginia Coastal Plain physiographic province and its aquifer system. On the map, you can see an orange line representing Interstate 95, and along the west side of I-95, the brown irregular line representing the fall zone, or the boundary between the hard rock Piedmont Province to the west and the unconsolidated sediments of the coastal plain to the east. In addition, the purple area is Virginia's Eastern Virginia groundwater management area. The yellow area is the Eastern Shore groundwater management area. These two areas are subject to Virginia's groundwater withdrawal regulations. You can see that the western boundaries of the management area, the coastal plain, and I-95 more or less match, and we treat them for the purposes of the study as more or less interchangeable. Let's take a look at the aquifer system. So this is a generalized cross-section representing a west to east cross-section, more or less where the red line is placed on the map. It is generalized and conceptual. What you can see is that the coastal plain aquifer system is a wedge thickening from west to east towards the coast of mostly unconsolidated sediments on top of bedrock. You can see that those sediments make up a layered sequence of aquifers represented in blue and confining units and confining zones represented in gray, including at the lower right corner of the diagram, the impermeable sediments of the Chesapeake Bay impact crater structure, which is a buried impact crater, also represented on the map, the two concentric circles under the mouth of the bay. You'll also note on the cross-section figure the blue arrows, which represent the generalized groundwater flow through the aquifer system under current day pumping conditions. So the diagram includes a well representing a major inland pumping center, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. You also see at the lower right corner of the diagram a saltwater transition zone representing the transition from freshwater to saltwater at depth in the aquifer system. And I'll note that the Eastern Shore has its own separate freshwater aquifer system. It is shallower and more or less isolated from the mainland system, and for the purposes of this talk, I'll focus on the mainland, and particularly the Potomac aquifer, which is the largest, thickest, and deepest of those aquifers that you see directly overlying bedrock. This diagram summarizes groundwater withdrawals in the Eastern Virginia groundwater management area in terms of the source aquifers on the left and the end uses on the right. So the total withdrawal from this management area is about 96 million gallons a day. That includes both reported uses and estimated uses. As you can see in the left-hand column, the Potomac aquifer in red is the largest source aquifer, representing about 70% of the total withdrawal, with other aquifers represented on top of it. The main uses in this area are industrial, represented in green, about 35% of the total, private domestic supply, represented in orange in the right-hand column, representing another 35%, and then public water supply in brown, which represents about 27%. I'll note that the private domestic use of groundwater is growing. It's projected to grow with population at a rate that will add 200 to 300,000 gallons of daily use each year through 2050 based on population projections. And these are lawful but unpermitted withdrawals that are not reported to DEQ and instead have to be estimated from census data. Let's take a look at the groundwater levels in the Potomac aquifer. So the blue area on the map represents the extent of the Potomac aquifer in map view. You can see that there are major pumping centers at the two orange circles located near Franklin and West Point. The contours, which are concentric in those areas, represent the overall decline of groundwater levels in the Potomac aquifer from pre-development times, say around 1900 to the early 2000s. And in the area of the Franklin Withdrawal Center there, the innermost contour is 60 meters, or nearly 200 feet, and that represents the maximum historical drawdown of groundwater pressure in that area. The current groundwater levels in the Franklin area are about 125 feet below sea level. So the drawdown of these water levels below sea level has fundamentally altered the pattern of groundwater flow in the coastal plain. Groundwater now tends to flow inward from the margins and downward from overlying aquifers into the Potomac where the major withdrawals are happening. These conditions cause land subsidence or sinking, which is measured with the extensometers that are located by the little pentagon shapes in red and green. Those are scientific instruments for measuring aquifer compaction. These conditions also cause the potential for regional saltwater intrusion into the aquifer system, or saline water moving into the freshwater aquifers. Taking a look at groundwater quality, the major concern at a regional perspective is, as I mentioned, saltwater intrusion. Localized increases in chloride concentration have been observed in some parts of eastern Virginia and on the eastern shore. In the maps on the right, you see the eastern Virginia, eastern shore. The upward pointing triangles represent locations where sampling has revealed increasing trends in chloride. So groundwater has been shown over some period of time to increase in salinity. The size of the triangle is scaled to the rate of the increase, although note that the scale is different in the two figures. The increasing trends in chloride are observed mainly in the Potomac Aquifer and the Yorktown Eastover Aquifer, which is the main one on the eastern shore. Most of these trends are spatially associated with known nearby withdrawals. And these observations are also consistent with groundwater budget analyses that indicate that there is some ongoing inflow into the system from coastal boundaries. Let's take a look at historical withdrawals and groundwater levels in the area of the Franklin Mill, so the Franklin Pumping Center that was depicted on that earlier map. The photo at left represents, it shows an observation well that was constructed near Franklin in 1941. At that time, it was drilled to a depth of 600 feet into the Potomac Aquifer, and at that time, water level rose 7 feet above the ground surface. That's why it had to be built with a pipe above ground surface to observe the water level. That means that under those conditions, at ground surface, it would have been a flowing artesian well. And that tells you what the pre-development conditions were at the time. The figure at right has two panels. The upper panel shows withdrawal amounts in millions of gallons per day. The bottom panel shows groundwater levels in feet below land surface. Both panels are scaled horizontally to years, starting in the early 1940s. So shortly after the photo was taken on the left in 1941, you can see that groundwater levels were near ground surface, and then went through a series of stages where between about 1940 and 1970, groundwater levels fell rapidly as industrial usage intensified. Between the Groundwater Act of 1973 and the Groundwater Management Act of 1992, groundwater levels in this area continued to fall at a lower rate. The Groundwater Management Act of 1992 succeeded in more or less stabilizing the decline of groundwater in this area. But then you see in 2010, a sharp increase in the groundwater levels, and up above, a sharp decrease in the withdrawals at the mill. That represented the 2010 closure of the Franklin Mill. So the mill began operations in 1938. Withdrawal reporting began in 1982, which is why we don't have data prior to that. And in 2010, the Franklin Mill closed. It then reopened in 2012 on a partial basis with a lower withdrawal rate. You can see in the green line there was a partial return to withdrawals, and a corresponding, in the blue line, a corresponding rebound and then slight dip in the groundwater levels in that area. Now in 2014 and continuing through 2017, DEQ negotiated lower annual maximum withdrawal limits for the top 14 users in the groundwater management areas. This was termed the Virginia Coastal Plain Groundwater Initiative, and it succeeded in stabilizing the gains that resulted from the closure of the mill. So as I mentioned, after 2010, groundwater levels across the Potomac Aquifer, because of that local rebound, broadly rose and stabilized for about a decade. But around 2021, those rising trends stalled and began to reverse. And under current conditions, groundwater levels throughout the Potomac Aquifer are projected to resume declining in the next 5 to 10 years. DEQ performed some new analyses, new simulations of a single additional withdrawal on top of the baseline withdrawal scenario at each of 9 locations that are depicted on this map. The hypothesized withdrawal was 3 million gallons per day. Each of these locations is intended to represent the conditions of a particular region in the coastal plain. None of those would pass the evaluation criteria for permitting under the regulations. So we had our technical contractor calculate what volume would pass the criteria for permitting. And the results varied by region. And you can see that the maximum result was 360,000 gallons per day in Northumberland County at the far eastern tip of the northern neck. It's the largest circle on the figure. And those values varied down to less than 30,000 gallons per day, which is the lower limit of our analysis, where the red circles are. So the green circle is the maximum at 360,000 gallons per day. Red circles are the minimum at less than 30,000. And of those, only the best case estimate would support a large withdrawal. Our analyses have some implications for aquifer replenishment projects. So within the Potomac Aquifer, we've determined that pressure effects, meaning the spread of water levels, travel tens of thousands of times faster than the typical flow of groundwater molecules themselves. So this means that injections into the aquifer may yield a regional increase in groundwater levels with only local migration of the injected water itself. However, it also means that regional groundwater level gains may dissipate rapidly when the injections cease. So this finding complicates the forecasting of groundwater levels that could result from aquifer replenishment projects such as the Sustainable Water Initiative for Tomorrow, or SWIFT. And observed groundwater level data will be required for understanding and modeling the SWIFT effects on the aquifer system. Very briefly, our assessment of the Act is that the Groundwater Management Act of 1992 and its implementation show that regulation has had positive effects on the groundwater supply. However, these effects are currently insufficient for long-term sustainability. And our report will offer recommendations on how to make the Act more effective. Those recommendations are likely to fall into a couple of categories, including additional statutory and regulatory authority or clarification of that authority, and additional resources for DEQ in the form of staff and funding. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Campbell?
Madam Chair, Mr. Campbell, really interesting presentation. Would it be possible or appropriate to get a soft copy of that shared with this board?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Campbell, what have you seen as far as subsidence in the Tidewater region due to groundwater withdrawal? And is there any offset from rebound due to post-glaciation?
That is difficult to answer. We cooperate with the U.S. Geological Survey on that particular question, and we've funded a new extensometer at the West Point Mill to try to get a handle on that. However, because of some past budget cuts at the U.S. Geological Survey, there was a discontinuity in the record, and the full monitoring has only been restored over the past few years. And so USGS is still gathering data to determine exactly what the relationship is, what the rates are, and what the relationship is between withdrawals, rebounds, and the rate of subsidence itself. That said, there is measurable subsidence and aquifer compaction happening, and that data is available on the public-facing USGS website.
Well, thank you for that very interesting presentation. This certainly points to the continued reliance on those fossil groundwater sources as something that bears close watching because of both the subsidence and its impact on man-made structures, as well as saltwater intrusion and the reliability of that aquifer for the long term to supply domestic needs. So this certainly bears close watching. Thank you.
Anyone else? We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Porterfield to do we have any public comments?
We haven't had anyone sign up to speak today, so there's no one signed up for a public
Okay,
forum.
all right. And so, future meeting dates, I don't know that we have anything
We
yet.
do not have a date in the future, but it will not be till 2026.
Very good. All right. Well, with that being said, anyone, all hearts clear today?
Madam Chairman, a brief request. About a year or so ago, we had a briefing on the HB 206 regulations on solar and environmental impact of that. I'd like to request that at some future appropriate meeting, we get an update on what's happening with those HB 206 regs. And I also understand that there's been some activity around the ecological cores question, which was unresolved at the time the regs were originally proposed. So I'd be interested in getting an update on what's happening in that area.
We can easily do that. Jonathan Rock is our chief deputy in charge of that. Would you like something in writing? Because he and I may not be around next year.
Whatever is easiest or most appropriate, and if he could get it done before the inauguration, that would probably be fine. Would love to see that.
Thank you. Because we just don't know if the next board meeting will be after the inauguration.
Understood.
Well, we thank you very much. So with that, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. You're adjourned.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.